Some tough subjects are discussed in this episode, and if you're affected by any of this, there are some organisations listed in our show notes who can help.
Okay, Zach.
Yes.
What was your nightmare padmate?
Okay. I've had a lot, but not a lot of nightmare padmates. But there was one guy I was padded up with in a prison in North London. Yeah, just narrowing it down. And when he used to snore at night, he used to shake the whole bed. Like literally, I'm thinking, why is the bed moving so much? And it's him snoring.
That is not
That
cool.
was, yeah, I think I spent...
I wouldn't be able to sleep.
It was about a week and I was out of there. What about for you then?
Okay, it's snoring as well. The bed didn't shake.
Yeah.
But I have to have like silence.
Oh, you're one of them.
And it was loud.
Is it?
God love her. Brilliant person. Awful snoring.
It happens. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jules.
And I'm Zach, and welcome back to Life After Prison, The Sit Down, a brand new podcast from National Prison Radio where we open up the discussion about life after prison. In each episode, we speak to incredible people who have been to prison or whose lives have been affected by the criminal justice system.
So in this episode, we spoke to the co-host and co-producers of Ear Hustle podcast, Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor. They are based in California, and we caught up with them during their time here in the UK for a special edition of The Sit Down.
Yes, we did. Ear Hustle was the first podcast made in prison, and we really wanted to get them on as they're pioneers in podcasting, and they have an amazing story to share.
So this was our first ever recording of Life After Prison. It was a slightly different setup. It was a different studio. Zach was trying out his cap on camera look, but it's a really interesting convo, so check it out.
For our very first show, we are very, very excited to introduce our guests who have travelled all the way from California to be here with us today. They are the producers, hosts, and creators of the incredible Ear Hustle podcast, Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor.
How are you?
Hello.
How you
Hello.
doing?
Great.
Yes.
We're great.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Thank you for being here
Yeah,
today.
thank you guys.
Yeah, man. Really happy that you're here.
Let's start with the basics.
Mm-hmm.
So for all of our listeners who might not know who you guys are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, who you are, and what Ear Hustle is all about?
Okay.
Ooh,
My name is Earlonne Woods, and Ear Hustle is about life inside prison and life outside prison, and we tell stories. That's what we do. Nigel can say it way better than me.
My name is Nigel Poor, and I'm the co-host and co-creator along with Earlonne Woods of the prison. Well, it used to be the prison-based podcast Ear Hustle from inside San Quentin. When we started the podcast, Earlonne was incarcerated, and we wanted to do a storytelling project. But now it's also stories about life post-incarceration, since obviously Earlonne is now out of prison. And we launched in 2017.
Yep.
Yeah. And
June
we just
14th.
finished our
Ninth season.
Wow.
76
76
episodes under our belt.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's incredible. I was also going to ask you how the podcast came about and whose idea was it? How did it start?
That's a great story. Some lady asked, no. No, it started from Nigel. So it's a story that, Nigel is a professor. She's currently still a professor. And she was at a college that's inside of San Quentin called Prison University Project. It's called Mount Tamalpais College now. And she wanted to do like documentaries of incarcerated individuals, just storytelling, and she came over to the media center and the idea for radio came up, and it's something that she spearheaded. And that morphed into us doing a podcast, but that lasted 3 years before she came to me and she was like, man, let's do a podcast. And I was like, all right, cool.
What's a podcast?
What is a podcast? Let's do it, but what is it?
Yeah.
And she brought in a few examples of a podcast, and I was like, oh, that's what's up. that's easy. Let's do it.
Mm.
And I didn't know.
I didn't want to break his heart and tell him it's not easy at all.
I thought it was easy because, you know, you listen to something and it's done well. So you thinking that it was just, they sat down, had a conversation, added some shit in, and that was it. And I was like, we can do that. But I didn't, unbeknownst to me, it was like 6 hours of tape that you got to go through and break down to 23 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever it is. So that was the hard part. But when she came with the idea, I was with it. Like, let's do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and originally we wanted to tell stories that would just be played inside the prison. And our big goal was to get them inside of all the prisons in California. And there's 35
plus a gang of camps. So, yeah.
But then we found out about a podcast contest called the Radiotopia Podquest, and we entered it. And eventually we won it. And so the podcast started playing outside the prison before it got inside the prison.
Oh,
yeah.
Whoa.
Isn't that
so
crazy?
It was outside.
Yes. It took longer to get it played inside the prison than to get it.
To be truthful, it was played in 112 prisons in England.
Yes.
Before it was even played in California.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, thanks to some people you probably know.
And what made you ask?
Earlonne?
Earlonne.
Okay, so I had been volunteering.
What?
Yeah.
No.
He wasn't like this before. He was very humble.
If I was in her position, I would pick you too, 100%. I'd pick you out of the crowd. You stand out.
There you go.
Like,
that was a good follow-up.
Handsome, amazing.
It's the opposite reason why I picked him. None of those things. So we were working. I was working down the media or volunteering down the media lab, and prison, as probably you all know, can be a hyper masculine place full of bravado and look at me. And Earlonne wasn't like that. He was like the quiet guy that listened really carefully. And so I'm always interested in the people that don't show off, the people that don't need attention. So that's why I was drawn to Earlonne. So we just started talking and I got to know him and I just really liked him. And of all the guys down there, I was like, this is a person I can work with. Yeah.
No,
so that's
you can definitely see or hear the chemistry anyway between you guys. So
yeah,
it's great to see.
Yeah,
definitely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Kind of remind me of
There you go. Charmer, innit?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I can see why you picked him.
Yeah, you have to find the right person to work with, or projects don't come together very well.
That's very true.
I hear that. So, Earlonne, done a bit of research, yeah?
Uh-oh.
And we've got something in common. So, both of us actually went to prison. Well, other than the obvious, both black. You know what I'm saying? We actually both went to prison at the age of 17. Am I right?
Yes.
So for me, that was a huge shock for my family and adjusting. How was that for you? What was that like for you and your family?
It was the same, you know. I think it was more shocking because of the fact that, you know, when you go to prison or jail, you know, you do what everybody do probably and say, I didn't do it. So sometimes your family thinking like, oh, they got my child in there wrong, you know, he didn't do it. But it was definitely a shock when it boiled down and I end up getting sentenced to 10 years in prison.
First time.
Yeah.
Did you? And how long did you do of that?
6 years, 3 months.
Okay. So for me, I got 7 and I did half. So I came out when I was 21. When did you come out?
I was 23, about to turn 24.
Okay.
So, but you know, and the crazy part is like, you think that, you know, you get out and you grown and all that, but you still be 17.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the difference. Because like you go to that suspended animation bubble and you don't grow up with everybody in society. You in a whole nother beast and you don't really pay attention till you get out and you be like still feeling 17.
That's true. We call it the pickle juice. That's what we call it. So you just been in the pickle juice, just there, like maintaining your age. And then you come out and I'm supposed to be 21, 22, right, but I'm a 17-year-old kid still.
Yeah, you don't have that experience everybody else have, you know.
Mad.
I can imagine just turning 21 and you want to go buy some alcohol or whatever you want to buy that you can, you know, you don't have those experiences. Yeah. So definitely.
Okay, so Earlonne, I'm really interested to know. So for me, what kept me going inside was my family and my friends and just thinking about them and getting back to them, being around them. I want to know what kept you so motivated and what kept you going when you were inside.
I would say the same thing. It's the same thing, I think, probably for everybody. You want to get back out to your loved ones. You want to get back out to your partners, your friends, whatever. And, you know, the first time, I went to prison twice. The first time it was more of, you want to get back to all that, but at the same time, you know, I didn't have a life sentence or anything, so I really didn't give. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, I was just living life. You know, I was involved in gangs at the time, so that was like one of my focuses. You know, just gang banging and up in prison and just having it was like a party instead of a punishment or me gaining something out of it, you know. So but I would say it's the same thing pretty much, because at the end of the day, when you locked in your cell, you know, you sit down, write your letters, talk to your people or whatever, and you have the same motivations and ambitions to get back out and deal with them.
I think it's because my sentence was so small compared to yours.
Time in prison is time in prison,
Yeah,
no matter
but
how
to
long.
know that the motivation is, you know, it can be the same is quite, I wanted to hear what your motivation was.
Yeah, I think that was it. I think, yeah, of course, is, you know, you want to get out and hang out with your mama. You want to get out, if you have kids, hang out with your kids and just be there. And, you know, then, you know, the interesting thing is like getting the pictures in the mail, getting this, because when you're away, everybody stay however big they are in them pictures. Like kids, they stay kids, even though they grown, they grow up and you be like, damn. And that's probably how some people realize how long they're gone, through the pictures and seeing people. But I think the motivation mainly was, get back out and enjoy your freedom, but mainly get back out for family and stuff.
Likewise, I wanted to throw it to Nigel. What's your motivation for going into prisons then?
Well, I'm a visual artist, and for the last 30 years, I've been really exploring how people make a life and how they find meaning. And I'm interested in the small details of people's lives and how you can find out a lot about them through the way they think. And so I just started thinking about prisons and how, when you're a place like that, how do you make a life? And I really rebel against the idea of that people are in suspended animation. I think that's a horrible way to think about your life, that no matter where you are, you should be finding ways to move forward. And so I was just curious how that happened in prison. And I wanted to prove that that didn't have to be the case. And so the stories we do, first I was teaching, and I think education is one way that you always move forward. But thinking about how we could do stories in prison and show people that there are fascinating things happening inside, complicated things. People are challenging themselves. People are forming relationships. They're falling in love. They're working. They're doing all the things that they do outside, but inside. So when I hear you talk about the pickle juice, and I hear Earlonne talk about suspended animation, that's one of the things about prison that really breaks my heart, because I think everybody has value, and that when you are shown or you're encouraged to see your own value, you change that idea and you won't accept this notion of being in the pickle juice.
Do you think that of every prisoner, no matter what offense, or is it like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some really difficult cases, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think, I would like to believe that you don't lose the right to be human, and you don't lose the right to change. It doesn't mean that you can walk away from the hurt that you've caused other people. It doesn't mean that you don't have to take responsibility. But most people, I believe, do change. And I think about the society that I want to live in and be part of. And I want to be part of a society that believes in change and responsibility. So it's how to bring those two things together. I actually believe prisons need to exist. I'm not an abolitionist, but I don't think they need to exist the way they do.
Love that.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm going to throw it back to Earlonne. Now, I did 9 years over like 3 sentences. Well, just about 9 years. You've done like 20 plus, right?
Over those 2 sentences, 27 years.
27. 3 times as much. Wow. Okay. So over that time, like my time, sometimes I felt a bit like my mind was still in prison. Do you ever feel like that? Is it ever the case that you feel like I've still got a prison mentality, or do you now have a freedom mindset?
I don't believe my whole time in prison I was ever mentally in prison. You know, my mind always stayed beyond the gates. I always thought outside the box. You know what I'm saying? Of course, you do get into those situations where you trapped and you realize that and you understand that. But I've always just lived in my mind somewhere else. You know, I dealt with what I dealt with in prison, but I always tried to keep my mind outside the gates. And it worked. It was, you know, when everybody else was like in prison thinking about fighting their cases and shit, I was thinking about, man, we need to get this to the voters and the elections, and let's try to do that, you know. And everybody's like, but you know, we was trying to do it. So I always thought differently, I think. And I think that was the one thing that probably kept me sane in there, was just thinking differently.
No.
What about sorry.
Go on, no, go on, Treat, no.
So what about regimented? Did you ever feel like you were stuck in a regiment, stuck in a serious routine that you...
I mean, everything in prison is routine.
But like, did you feel regimented? Did you feel kind of stuck in a routine? Stuck in, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like institutionalized?
Yeah.
No, I don't think I ever got to that institutionalized point. And maybe in some ways that I couldn't explain right now, but I never really got into that. I think
the mind strong.
Yeah,
I think it's so nice to hear.
I think it's you know, the one thing I made sure of is that I live my life to the best of my ability every day, no matter where I was at. I knew I was in prison, but I was gonna, you know, we don't know if we're gonna wake up tomorrow. So I didn't live in there like all sad and down. Just live my life. When I was doing a life sentence, I probably smoked weed every day for 14 years. So wow. I lived my life like that.
Yeah, that. Do you ever miss prison?
Do I mean, hell no. Hell no. I mean, I you know, it's a trip because I go back into the prisons. I don't want to say regularly, but I do go back into the prisons, you know. Do I miss it? Hell nah. The first time I think I've had a prison experience since I've been home was when we landed in Norway and they stripped me out because they thought I had drugs or something on me. That was the first time I felt like some prison. You know what I'm saying?
What was that like?
It was, you know what? You go back into, if you want to say institutionalized, you go back into an institutional mind state where you can separate yourself from what's happening. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And you know, so when it got to the strip searches, it was like, whatever, it is what it is, you know? But that's probably the first time I've experienced that type of shit since I've been home.
Okay, Earlonne, we have to talk about your sentence being commuted. But first you're going to have to explain what a sentence being commuted means. So please, can you break that down for us?
Sure. In California, they have an application you can put in, which is a commutation of sentence. Now, this is a hope, a dream, a wish, you know, the average person just don't get this, you know, and every now and again, you know, they do. And usually the governors don't do it. So a friend of mine named Alex, she was a volunteer there. She was like, hey, you need to put in an application because, you know, y'all doing good shit. You know, y'all doing good shit with the podcast, you know, and just, you know, being a good example. So
is this for no matter what offense you've got? Like anyone can apply? Like
anybody can apply. I think people on death row, and that's what you usually hear it with, is people on death row, you know, or something like that, where they get their sentence commuted or pardoned, whatever. And so I filled out the application, and when I filled out the application, I submitted it, and just by sheer luck, sheer ear hustle fame, I don't know, within 13 days, I had an interview from the governor's office, which is like some unheard of shit. And once they interviewed me, that starts the process. And for some people that don't have a past or prior criminal record, you know, the governor can just deal with it. But being that I had past convictions, I had to go through the prison board in-bank hearing to see, you know, whether or not they'll pass it on to the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court has to decide on it, whether or not the governor is abusing his powers by commuting my sentence. And once the parole board did it, once the Supreme Court approved of it, it went back to the governor, and then the governor commuted my sentence, it took about 11 months altogether. So once he commuted my sentence, that basically said that my life sentence was over. and I was released like 10 days later. So it took a while, but when it came down to it, and when it happened, I had a ball. I enjoyed it.
I was gonna say, how did it feel? Tell us a bit more.
Well, I mean, so okay, this is how it felt. This is 2022. My first parole appearance for parole was in 2028, November of 2028. That was the first time that I would have walked in front of a parole board and tried to state my claim for release, or try to articulate why I should be released, whether I had accountability and all that shit. And I was like, ooh, they would have doubted me. They'd have doubted me, because when it comes to those conversations and them hammering you, I'd just be like, ah. But it felt for me, being that I didn't have to go through that, being that the governor was just like, hey, man, based on what you're doing and how you're being a positive individual, I feel you should be released on parole immediately. Oh, I was happy. It was like winning a lottery. It was definitely winning the lottery, because it don't happen that often. But it do happen, but it don't happen that often. And it all depends on who the governor is that's in office to even think about doing it. So, yeah, I was happy. Still happy.
I'm happy for you.
Thank you. I'm happy you happy.
Nigel, I also want to know how it felt for you, because obviously you're involved in podcast with Earlonne already, and you hearing that, how did that feel for you?
Well, like Earlonne said, it was a really long process. And I think when you are involved in the prison system, you set yourself up for disappointment and to not get excited about anything. And so the process took forever. And I always hoped it would happen, but I didn't want to count on it because I kept thinking, Earlonne loves to joke. And I told him, when you find out, don't joke with me. Don't tell me you didn't get it if you got it, and don't tell me you did get it if you didn't, because that would just be awful. So of course I was really excited, for him as a person, and then what it would mean for the podcast, and what would we be able to do after. But I also had, this sounds weird, I also had feelings of loss, because we had met in prison, we had developed this project in prison, everything we knew about each other was in prison. And I didn't know when he got out if he was still going to want to do it. Maybe he'd want to be as far away from prison as possible. And I would totally understand that. So I really wanted to make his own decision based on what was best for him. But at the same time, I didn't want to lose our relationship, and I didn't want it to change, and I didn't know what would happen. And so luckily, he didn't want to move on. But with him outside of prison, it was very difficult for me to go back in, because I felt like my best friend in there was no longer there. And so I had to figure out how to make new relationships. So there was a loss that was completely outweighed by the gain of it. Do you know what I mean? But I have to admit, there were times where I was like, oh, how is this going to work out? But of course I was thrilled. And the weird thing was, when he got out and we picked him up at the gate, we drove away from the prison and we were sitting next to each other in a car, which we had never done before. And it was like he'd always been out. It wasn't weird. It was just like, hey, let's go get something to eat. So that was so interesting that it wasn't there wasn't a big adjustment period, honestly.
And back like you never left.
So it's what, and you may have this experience too. I don't care how long you spent in prison. When you walk out that door, it's almost like that never happened. Because it's not like we have never experienced freedom before. We experienced freedom all our lives. So when we get back to it, it's like we've never left it. And again, it goes back to, suspended animation. You just hovering, you know what I'm saying? And once you back. And the only difference for me when I got out was I didn't see cash money anymore. Like everybody's using cards, playing with their phones. And I don't want to say I forgot about homelessness, but you don't see homelessness when you're in prison.
Yeah,
everybody got a cell. You know what I'm saying? So that was the biggest difference. Those were the two big differences.
Because we got a saying where you only do 2 days: the day you go in and the day you come out.
Right.
Everything in between just almost gets erased.
Definitely.
As soon as you walk through the gates,
it's definitely there, but it's almost like, because you have to think, like I was just telling, when we was in Norway, I had met these two women in a club, and they may have been 24. And when we was talking, and they was asking why I was there, and I told them, and when I told them I had served like a total of 27 years, they like fell out. And I'm like, well, it's over now. But if we was saying I'm finna go do 27 years today and 20, now I was like, then it'll be a problem. That's definitely a long time. But it's in the past. It's gone. It's done.
And talking about release, what kind of support is there out there in America for people who are released from prison?
So it has changed over time. You know, when I first got out, when I was 23, there wasn't as much support. There wasn't as many jobs open for formerly incarcerated individuals. You know, companies wasn't trying to hire, not unless they got some incentive for hiring individuals. And that probably only capped at so many. Today, it's just a little different because you have a lot of groups or a lot of jobs that's pretty much designed for people that get out of prison. Like all the guys we see with them vests on in San Francisco, and now guys that get out, they're usually in jobs, if they want to be, where they become kind of like not correctional officers, but they become in those type of positions where but now they're in either transitional houses or some type of housing with the homeless. You know what I'm saying? And they got to go in, and I be clowning them too, because they got to go in, they got to search the little areas, make sure they don't have nothing wrong. And, you know, in those spaces, I was like, and we was working on a story too about that. I forgot what we was calling it. I just had a label on it.
Oh, yeah.
Damn, it was a funny name too. And it was just like, sometimes we'd just have a placeholder name, and that was the name of it. I can't think of it, but it was about prisoners turning into COs. Damn, it's killing me. I can't think of that. Damn. It was something, P-O-P. It was something. Yeah. But it was funny though. It was because the roles had changed. You know what I'm saying? Now they got alarms and keys and, you know what I'm saying, and walkie-talkies. It was funny.
Nigel, this is one for you. So you spoke a little bit earlier about why you work in a prison. You did some stuff before Ear Hustle inside a prison. What were you working on?
Yeah, so first I was teaching a history photography class, and the way I teach about photography is that photography is this very generous medium where anybody can insert themselves into the photograph and understand it through their own experience. So in the class, I was trying to use photography and talking about photographs as a way for the men in the class to talk about their own experience and to think about how they would make images that would express their own stories. So it was an academic class, but it was really more of like a psychological class. And that's what got me interested in storytelling inside the prison. And then at the same time, I'd gotten access to this group of archival negatives that were taken at San Quentin by correctional officers between 1938 and 1970. And they were this amazing archive of everything that happens in prison, from really gruesome images of murder and suicides, and then things like weddings and people making ice sculptures and photographs of visiting and families. So when you looked at the archive of these thousands of negatives, you saw images that were clearly taken inside prisons and ones where you couldn't tell at all that they were inside. And so I loved that idea that this life inside and outside was commingling. So I worked with a group of guys, including Earlonne, and this was before the podcast, where I would bring the photographs in and the guys would look at them, and then they would map them, write about what they saw happening in the photographs on one side, sort of diagram them out, and then use those diagrams to create a story about what they saw in the photographs. So those were the things I was doing inside the prison before I started working on the podcast.
The story comes from the photo.
Yes. But it comes from their interpretation of the photograph. Really cool. So I can give you an example. I know we don't have a photograph here, but what's interesting to me is, again, what experience people bring to the photographs. So there was this one photograph called Stabbing in the Gym, and there was a man that was being held up by two arms, and he had stab wounds in his back. And one arm you could see had a suit coat on, and the other was a bare arm with tattoos. And this guy, Ruben, who was one of my students, got that photograph to write about. And on the man's back where he had been stabbed, he wrote about how this body was a fallen cathedral being buttressed up by two arms, one of support and one of like withdrawal, of not support. And I loved that he used these architectural terms to talk about a body, and he didn't talk about a stabbing. He talked about a proud cathedral that was being buttressed by two ways of seeing. And so it was things like that. And it just kind of gave me chills to read it. And when I looked at the photograph, I would never see that. I would see a stabbing and I would see brutality. And he saw something really different. So I love the idea that people, again, use their experience to pull out like deeper meanings and things that they see. And I think, again, photography does that. And that's what we try to do with Ear Hustle, is to bring out these deeper stories of from something that most people would just see the surface of.
And let me say this too. When you're in prison and people send you pictures after you take this class, if you didn't before, you're going to look at everything in the picture.
Oh my God. Yeah. I remember in the class I taught one guy, it was saying this was actually in the university class, but one guy was saying he was looking at photographs and he could tell his wife was having an affair because he could see different details in the photograph.
Like reflections and things like that.
Shoes that shouldn't have been there.
Size 12 of those.
Wow.
So photographs give away a lot if you look carefully.
You know what? That's so true. And it's amazing why you do that and your meaning behind Ear Hustle and, people's stories, because most people just read something and just make a judgment, or they'll listen to something or see something, and it's just the first thing that comes to their head is, it's a judgment. It's their first judgment.
Yeah.
And then there's just so much more going on that we have no idea about. So
Definitely.
to try and even begin to draw those things out is a beautiful thing. So
yeah. And when you look really carefully, like, for example, Jules, when we were talking, I think to really understand people, you have to look at sometimes the nonverbal cues, like the way someone's face changes when you ask a question, like either the expression that lights up or the way someone shuts down. And when you see those things happen, that's when you know you're getting to a really interesting point, because their body is giving something away that they don't even realize it. Yeah.
So staying on the vibe of Ear Hustle, what's the most memorable story that you have ever told on Ear Hustle?
Oh, there's so many. This is really hard.
I mean, it's a trip, man, most memorable, but I can tell you the one story that I didn't have any follow-up questions. Do you know which one that was?
No, tell me.
We can get one from each.
Yeah.
So it was Left Behind. When I think it was talking to Curtis Roberts, and it was a trip because our new folk was like, just ask him about all kind of stuff, this, that, and the other. And one of the questions I had asked him was like, what was one of your like worst days in prison type shit? And he said when he was raped in prison. And I didn't have a follow-up question for that because I had never even thought of nothing. It was like, where do you go from there? So I would say that's like one of my Ear Hustle moments where I was just like a deer in headlights, didn't know where to go from there.
So that was the first time you ever heard it, and was that the last time you ever heard that?
That was the last time I heard that in the interview. Somebody just being like honest of what happened to him.
Has anybody else said that after?
No, I haven't got that. Have we got that?
No.
Yeah, that was like one of the most like. Yeah, I think like when it comes to just us doing interviews, that to me, that was the one that was just like,
Yeah, and one of doesn't answer your question, but I will answer it after. One of the things that's really good about doing this together is that in interviews we can help each other out. When we hear things that are difficult, then there's somebody else to respond, because that was a tough one. But
yeah, and I don't know where Nigel was at that day, but I definitely would have needed her that day. Because she would get to the. Yeah.
But it's tough. I mean, you have to be able to hear things like that and then not just leave it. Because when someone tells you something like that, they need a response, I think. Yeah. I don't know. This is so hard to answer. And anytime you ask me this, I'd probably give a different answer. But right now, it's not. One story that's really close to me right now is a story we did with a woman, Leslie Van Houten, who's been in prison for 52 years. And the idea of the story was to talk about aging in prison. I mean, can you imagine 52 years in prison? She was 18 when she went in. And because she was in a women's prison, we couldn't do it in person. We had to do it over the phone. And it was 15-minute phone calls. He's the numbers person. I always get the numbers wrong, but
and she was 19.
She was like, see, exactly. It was 52 years, right?
52.
52.
Probably now about 54, but yeah, it's been down.
Yeah. So the challenge of the story was, how do we connect with someone over the phone? And she was involved in a very famous crime in the United States. And we didn't want that to be the story. We wanted it to be the story about what happens over 50 years in prison. And so I'm just very proud of that story. And I'm proud of the connection. I mean, she's someone we're still in touch with. You know,
doing good?
Yeah, she is. She is doing well. And I don't know if she'll ever get out of prison, and that's hard. You know, it's very hard for her, and it's hard for people who consider themselves close with her. So, yeah, that.
Then her situation is not. If you base people's conduct in prison on what's gonna let them out, that's not her situation, because she's a model prisoner. You know what I'm saying? She creates groups. She do all this. Her situation is more political. It's politics on how you gonna look if you let her out, and everybody, he let this person in, which he should. You know, I mean, I think anybody that's in power should let this person out, because the parole board, the people it's their job to figure out public safety or who's suitable to go back. They've found her suitable to be released 5 times, but it's just the powers that be that's like, nope, not on my watch.
Yeah, that's mad.
Yeah,
because it's got to be reviewed and all that. So like you said, like you mentioned earlier, having each other is a great way to like balance each other and support each other. Like
Definitely.
This is our first like podcast, our first episode. You know, we wanted to get some advice from you guys. So like, what are the most important lessons that you guys have learned since doing Ear Hustle?
I would say, you know, sitting across from the master of interview. No, I mean, because see, I might be on the surface of talking about shit. Nigel would be like, so what did the bar smell like? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, she would really get in there, you know what I'm saying? And she would ask all of those minutiae questions, those questions that matter, you know, and one little question to expand into some other shit. So it's just really just, you know, working off each other, and like, if it's some hood shit, I'm on them. You know what I'm saying? If it's, you know, something that's more intimate and detailed, Nigel would be on it. So it's just really...
It's like a perfect little balance.
Yeah, it's understanding each other's strengths.
Yeah. I have a lot of advice, but I'll give you 2. One is what Earlonne just said, is really know each other's strengths and weaknesses and support and relish the things that the other does well that you can't do, and own what you can do well and understand what the other can't do as well. And then you become like one whole being. I think the other thing is to don't shy away from things that are funny and light when you're talking about stuff that's really difficult. Humor is super important. And when we started Ear Hustle, people first were a little bit shocked that how much we laughed, and it actually bothered some people. And it was like, but that's life. You know, like
Definitely.
Life in prison, although I've never been in prison, incarcerated isn't just one flat note, right? And there's things that are funny, there's things that are painful, and there's things that are joyous. And so I think that all has to be reflected in the interviews and the stories you want to tell. You know, you want to entertain people, but you also you use entertainment as a way to drag them in and think about hard things. So,
and we got a word for it. Edutainment.
Edutainment.
We're going to educate you, and we're going to entertain you at the same time.
That's my word of the day.
I've never even heard of it.
That's my word of the day. Edutainment.
It's important. And also, Jules, something you told me when I asked you to give me advice for going into prison is to be yourself. You can't be, I don't think it works if you try to be someone you're not, because people know the bull.
And also, yourself. People that's never been in prison, they always, and I guess what we end up doing best is that people, they feel when you're in court and they see you get sentenced, they think your life ends right there. Like that's forever you is in that court being sentenced. They don't know that when you leave there, you live your life like everybody else, you know? Prison is a microcosm of society, and you're going to laugh, you're going to joke, you're going to clown, you're going to cry, you're going to do all that shit. You know what I'm saying? But I think people really think you're just stuck in that moment, in that courtroom forever. You know, they don't realize that, okay, that was a part of the process. How to move from that, you know, and I'm living life, whatever. No matter if it's 20, 30 years in prison. So you definitely going to joke and clown.
Yeah, there's good moments. Yeah,
I've had
to go with it.
Some of my funniest memories inside and my saddest, but Yeah, you're right. Some people are just shocked to even see you out, or they think you're just dead. But and they're like, "Whoa, you're
Story goes
alive."
on. Yeah.
Life moves on, exactly.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for that. And so for people that don't know about Ear Hustle or never seen it, or you guys, where can they find it?
Yes.
Where can they go? Let the people
This is his
know.
area of expertise.
Well, we're
He is good on the Instagram.
Thanks for the follow back as well.
I don't. I post every now and again.
You
I
have
post
angles.
every now and again. But you can definitely find Ear Hustle. You can go to the website at earhustlesq.com or any social media platform at Ear Hustle.
Okay,
And
cool.
you can find us. And
We'll put all of that in the description below as well.
Definitely.
So at Ear Hustle.
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate you guys coming in, man. This has been a great interview.
Yeah.
Our first one as well.
Nice
we
to
left
you.
one thing out.
This is when I do this.
And if you want to read about it,
Ah.
I'll leave Nigel. I'll let you do that one, Nigel.
Yeah, so during COVID, Earlonne and I wrote a book called This is Ear Hustle: Unflinching Stories of Everyday Prison Life, published by Penguin Random House.
Nigel's looking at me like, did I get that right?
Did I get that right? Did I get that right?
Definitely.
So if people want to read about it, we also did an audiobook. We read the book, which was a...
Wait, you guys are actually the voice on the audiobook?
Yes, but we had some of the people that we actually interviewed, and then they hired actors because we didn't want to impersonate people's voices.
Yeah.
Because you heard his English accent.
Oh no, he hasn't heard it yet.
No, he hasn't heard it. I gotta get warmed up. I gotta get warmed up.
This is coming soon.
Yeah, so we read our parts, and then we had some actors in it. But that was a really
cool. We won't
interesting
give it
experience.
to them now. We'll hold that for some exclusive content, innit?
Guys, that's wicked.
You know
Well
it?
done. Okay, amazing.
Well, thank you for today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
We had a lot of fun with Earlonne and Nigel. They spent a couple of days in the UK, and it was really lovely to meet them.
Yes, it was indeed. If you have recently been released from prison and you need additional support, there are organisations out there that can help you with that, such as NACRO and Unlock, who help people rebuild their lives when they've come out of prison. We also touched on family and friends in the episode and their support there for families and friends of people with convictions, such as PACT. And we also touched on arts, as Nigel Poor is a visual artist, and how art can be used as a tool for rehabilitation. So if you're interested in arts, you can look for organisations using the Clinks directory for organisations such as the Irene Taylor Trust, who put on music projects for people inside and outside of prison, and the Kursler, who have an awards, and they display exhibitions of artwork from people with convictions.
We want to know if you have heard anything in this episode or any of our other episodes. We want to know if you've heard anything that's inspired you to make positive changes in your life. So please get in touch. You can do this by DMing us on Instagram and Twitter at AfterPrisonPod, or you can email us at podcast@prison.radio, or if you would like to write to us, you can. You can write to us at Life After Prison, National Prison Radio, HMP Brixton, London, SW2 5XF.
And we hope you enjoyed the show.
Yes, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It helps other people find the podcast too.
And we'll see you next time.